Okay, so I don't want to go through like everything from the first class because we'll never get anywhere. But the I mean, essentially, so the Mishnah says that everybody has to be provided 4 cups of wine, and everybody has to recline. And then on the eve of Pesach, from near Mincha, it's not allowed to eat, not just matzah, it's not allowed to eat at all, so that when you get to the Seder, you are hungry, okay? Because eating the matzah is a mitzvah, and you should observe mitzvot enthusiastically, not reluctantly. And this tradition may go back even before the destruction of the temple, in which case it wasn't only the eating of the matzah that was a mitzvah, but the Korban Pesach, the Paschal sacrifice, was a mitzvah as well. Okay, and this is what Gemara does. I mean, it can get bogged down in incredible detail, right? And so the question is raised, essentially, why do we need this statement that you can't eat on Erev Pesach from near Mincha onwards? It seems superfluous because we have elsewhere a baraita that says that on every Erev Shabbat and Erev Chag, you can't eat from Mincha on, right? So there are a couple things. One is that, we never want to have a superfluous statement, right? I mean, the tradition does not like things that are superfluous, right? But just to be clear, because we discussed it, what is a baraita? Does anybody remember what a baraita is?
No.
Okay. There's no reason that you should. I mean, it's already a long time ago. That was 4 months that we learned this. But a baraita is a statement that was handed down orally, that is written in Mishnaic Hebrew and quotes one or more Tanaim. Okay, the Tanaim, if a rabbi is quoted in the Mishnah, he's a Tana. Okay, if a rabbi is quoted in the Mishnah, he's a Tana. And Mishnah and Tana, it comes actually from the same word, except that the root is Shana in Hebrew and Tana in Aramaic. But a rabbi quoted in the Mishnah is a Tana, and a Tana, that's like the earliest level of authority. Okay, and if you're like in an argument, if you're in the Gemara, right, and a rabbi who's quoted in the Gemara but not in the Tana, not in the Mishnah, is an Amora. And Amora is of a lesser authority than a Tana. So if you have like 2 Tanas versus 1 Tana, the 2 Tana position wins, right? If you have, but you could have, 5 Amoras and 1 Tana, the Tana wins, right? It's like playing poker, right? A Tana always trumps an Amora. Okay, so a baraita is a Tanaitic statement that did not make it into the final cut of the Mishnah, but was handed down orally. Okay, but the difference between a Mishnah and a baraita, and I know this is complicated and confusing, okay? if you have a Mishnah that's basically like irrefutable, okay, a Baraita can be refuted. How? Because a Baraita was handed down orally, right? And therefore, there's a possibility that it's inauthentic or corrupt, right? I mean, Mishnah is written, you can't say, oh, that's not a real Mishnah, or that's a corrupted Mishnah, right? There was a mistake introduced. No, it's a Mishnah. But a Baraita could be corrupted, okay? It could be, it's like playing a game of telephone, right? And again, from the Mishnah, so the Mishnah is codified or closed when? Roughly.
If
200.
If the rabbis agree to?
No, but I'm sorry, the compilation, the text called the Mishnah, was composed in its final form around 200 of the Common Era. Okay. But it quotes authorities much earlier. The Gemara, nobody knows exactly when the Gemara was compiled in its final form, but 500, 600. Okay, so there's 300 to 400 years between the compilation of the Mishnah and the compilation of the Gemara. Okay, that's a good long time. I mean, right, this country only exists as an independent country for 244 years, right? So, more time than that at a minimum between the compilation of the Mishnah and the compilation of the Gemara. Okay, so I'm gonna start. All right. On paragraph 5, 99b, paragraph 5, and I'll start sharing the screen. Okay. So, right. So here, the question that we're asking, right, is again, why is this Baraita even necessary? Right? It seems to be repeating something that we already know. Right? And the Gemara then asks, and on the eve of Shabbat adjacent to Mincha time, is it permitted to eat? But wasn't the following taught in a Baraita? A person may not eat on the eve of Shabbat and festivals from 9 hours onward, so that he will enter Shabbat when he is filled with the desire to eat. This is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yosef says one may continue eating until dark. According to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, even on Shabbat Eve, one may not eat from before the time of the lesser mincha, which is at 9.5 hours of the day. Okay, so, I mean, what it's going to come down to is that the Baraita vis-a-vis Shabbat says from mincha onward. And for Pesach, it says near mincha onward. Okay, so near mincha is earlier than from mincha, right? Right? I mean, if you say, I don't know, from near Halloween, it's forbidden to eat chocolate, right? That's not the same thing as saying from noon on Erev Halloween, right? I mean, it's a broader period of time. Okay, so that's going to be what the difference is. Okay, but we don't yet know that, right? So we're still saying, you seem to be telling us something that we already know. Okay, is that clear so far? I recognize that this is a little complicated, but is it so far clear what we're saying? Yeah? Okay. So, Amar Marzutra man lema da lan dimitratztehi. Yilma mishabashtahi. So Marzutra said, who will say to us that this version of the Baraita is accurate? Perhaps this Baraita is corrupted, and therefore it cannot serve as the basis of an objection. Okay, so this is as far as we got in the previous class, right? The idea that a Baraita could be corrupted, and therefore you can't use it to prove anything. Okay. Meremar said to him, okay, now this is going to get really complicated. I apologize. And some say it was Rav Yemar. I happened to come to the festival lecture of Rav Pinchas, son of Rav Ami, and the Tana who recited Mishnayot stood up and taught this Baraita before him, and he accepted it. Okay. Now, again, part of this is you have one word that means two different things. Okay. Because I already explained that a Tana, right? A Tana is a rabbi who's quoted in the Mishnah, right? But there's also the job of Tana, which is not the same thing. Because remember, the Baraitas are handed down how? Orally, right? The guy whose job was to remember all the Baraitas was called a Tana. Okay, so you can't give a class, right? Since not everybody, right? Remember, printing hasn't been invented yet, right? Printing hasn't been invented yet. And even if it had been, the Baraitas at this point are not written down, right? So you can't go into a class and say, okay, everybody open up your book to page 127. There's no book and there's no page 127, right? So if I'm giving a class, right, it's enough for me to know the material. I have to remember the whole Baraita as well. No, there's a guy who that's a specialized job, and he comes in and he goes spouting off the Baraitas, right? Okay, so that's what's going on. So this Rav Pinchas, son of Rav Ami, is teaching a class, and the Tana taught this Baraita, and he accepted it. Okay, if Rav Pinchas thought that this Baraita was corrupt, he would have objected. Right? This incident proves that the above version of the Baraita is accepted and considered accurate. If so, the aforementioned objection to Rav Papa's opinion on the basis of the Baraita remains difficult. Rather, Rav Papa's answer is insufficient, and it is clear that the Mishnah must be understood in accordance with the explanation of Rav Huna. In other words, the Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosei, who maintains that although one may eat until dark on the eve of Shabbat and other festivals, it is prohibited to eat on Passover Eve from shortly before the Lesser Mincha until nightfall. Okay, so let's go back, right? We have this argument between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yosei, right? And Rabbi Yosei says that on Shabbat, one may continue eating until dark. Okay, but Rabbi Yehuda says, no, that you have to stop. Okay, so in other words, right, what is the question? The question is, what do we need this Baraita for, right? What do we need it for? It's telling us something we already know, right? And it's not telling us something. Now the Gemara is saying, no, it's not telling us something we already know, according to Rabbi Yosei, because Rabbi Yosei says that on Erev Shabbat, eat and drink until dark. Erev Shabbat and Erev other Yontif, but not Erev Pesach, right? Okay. This clear? I mean, it's not clear to me, so I don't know why it's clear to you. All right. All right. I'm going to try and rephrase it, although I don't want to get bogged down because this is not, I mean, this is the kind of technical stuff that the Mishnah that the Gemara can get bogged down in that's not as interesting for our purposes. Okay. Basically, all right. The Mishnah is telling us Erev Pesach, you can't eat from around Mincha. Right? That's what the Mishnah is telling us. Right? And then the Gemara is saying, no, we already know this. Right? We already know this. We have a Baraita that says Erev Shabbos and Erev Yontif, you can't eat from Mincha onward. So what is the new information that the Baraita is giving us? And then this other guy comes in and says, well, maybe this is a bad Baraita anyway, so don't pay any attention to it. And then, but now we come back and we say, no, it's a good Baraita, it's an authentic Baraita, right? But now we go back to the argument between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yehuda is the one who says, Erev Shabbos and Erev Yontif, you have to stop eating at Mincha. And Rabbi Yossi says, no, you don't. Right? So this Baraita is adding to us new information, but only according to the school of Rabbi Yossi. Because Rabbi Yossi would say every Shabbos and every Yontif, except Pesach, you can eat right up until dark, but on Pesach you have to stop. Okay? Now, I think I've rephrased it accurately and a little bit more easy to follow. Yes?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. All right, then the Gemara asks, according to the explanation of Rav Huna, does it work out well? Didn't Rabbi? I'm going to skip some of this, okay? Well, I'm going to skip the first part of this. Okay, Rabbi Abahu said that Rabbi Yosef bar Rabbi Hanina said the halakha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda with regard to the eve of Passover, and the halakha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yossi with regard to the eve of Shabbat. Okay, then the Gemara infers from the above statement, from the fact that it was necessary to say that the halakha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda with regard to the eve of Passover, this proves by inference that Rabbi Yossi disagrees with regard to both cases, both the eve of Shabbat and other festivals, as well as Passover Eve. Consequently, it is impossible to ascribe to the opinion of Rabbi Yossi the Mishnah's prohibition against eating on the eve of Passover, as he evidently permits one to eat until dark, even on Passover Eve. Okay. I'm going to skip all this stuff because it's frankly, it's not that interesting to me, and it doesn't really add that much knowledge to us. But I am going to go down to the next paragraph. Okay, see number 6, Stan.
Yeah. You talk about until nightfall. So when does Shabbos start? When does the festival start?
It starts at nightfall. Starts at dusk.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we can eat right up until then.
Well,
Or
that's
even
what we're going to
beyond
get to. Okay, that's what we're going to get to.
Well,
I mean, it's an interesting, because this part I personally find really interesting. Okay, not so much for the halakha per se as the methodology behind it. Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
All right. So the Tanya mafsikin l'shabbatot divrei Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Yossi Omer ein mafsikin. was taught in a Baraita that Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yosei disagree about interrupting a meal. If people were eating on the eve of Shabbat, they must interrupt for Shabbatot, meaning that once Shabbat begins, they must interrupt their meal, clear away the table, recite the evening prayers and Kiddush before continuing their meal. This is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yossi says these diners need not interrupt their meal. Okay, so that's the situation, right? I mean, it's like, it's late November or December, right? And I call you up and I say, Stan, let's go to lunch. And you say, okay, what time? And I say 2 o'clock. And you say to me, 2 o'clock? I say, Stan, I'm not going to be able to get out of work until then. I'll meet you for lunch at 2 o'clock. Right? And now we're having lunch. And we started lunch at 2 o'clock. And now it's 4:30. We're still eating lunch. And we look out the window, Gevalt, it's Shabbos. What do we do? Right? So Rabbi Yehuda says, if that happens to you, stop, you interrupt your meal, clear away the table, daven, say Kiddush, and then continue the meal. Right? Rabbi Yossi says, no, you don't even have to do that. Okay, now, I mean, I find this fascinating, right? Because who would do this, right? I mean, like, what Jew who cares about Shabbat is going to have lunch so late on Friday afternoon that they look outside and they notice that it's already Shabbos? I mean, how the heck does that even happen? Right? How the heck does it even happen? Right? So then you come back to me and say, well, look, if the Gemara can debate whether a golem can count for a minion or a monkey can be a shochit, they can debate what happens if people are eating lunch on Friday late and they notice that Shabbos has started. Doesn't mean it ever would actually happen, right? It's a theoretical question. Theoretical question, right? So far, so good. I mean, at least you could say that, right? So let's go on. Turns out it wasn't just a theoretical question. The Baraita continues by relating a story. There was an incident involving Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel and Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yosei. Okay, so Yehuda and Yosei, the two antagonists of this discussion, are having lunch with Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Okay, now what's the difference between Rabban and Rabbi?
Not a real rabbi.
Anybody know? Rabban is the head of the Sanhedrin. Okay, so he's like the chief rabbi. Okay, we're the head of the Sanhedrin, or the head of the academy at Yavne. Right, he's the Rosh Hashiva. All right, so they were reclining and eating together in Akko on Friday afternoon, and the day of Shabbat was sanctified, i.e. Shabbat began. Okay, now this is interesting because Yehuda and Yosei are the two antagonists of this discussion, right? And miraculously, it's no longer a theoretical discussion, right? The situation that they were arguing about, presumably for years, actually happens. And who does it happen that they're having lunch with? The head of the academy, right? Shabbat began. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel said to Rabbi Yosei Barabi, which is a title for an important man of distinguished lineage, Is it your will that we should interrupt and be concerned for the statements of our colleague Yehuda, who maintains that one is obligated to interrupt his meal? All right, so, right, remember, they've got this argument. Rabbi Yehuda says, right, you're having Friday lunch, you notice it became Shabbos, stop, daven, say Kiddush, and then finish your meal. Rabbi Yosei says, nah, you don't have to do that, right? So now this is exactly what happened. And Shimon ben Gamliel said, Yosei, is it okay if we stop and act according to the statements of our colleague Yehuda, who says that you have to stop, daven, and say Kiddush, right? Now, why would Shimon ben Gamliel suggest that? Right? Why would Shimon ben Gamliel suggest that?
Mhm.
Right? Look at the phrase, interrupt and be concerned for the statements of our colleague Yehuda.
And what was his statement?
That's what you have to do, that you have to stop eating, daven, say Kiddush, and then you can continue eating. Why would he say that? All right, let me ask another question. Which statement is more stringent?
Rabbi Yehuda's.
Rabbi Yehuda's, exactly, right? In other words, like, I don't know. Let's assume that there's 2 kosher restaurants in town. Okay, and one of them is glot kosher and one of them is only regular kosher.
No such thing.
Absolutely, Ben's Deli. Ben's Deli is regular kosher. Okay, so now, Stan, you and I are going out to lunch and we're going to invite Toby, right? And Toby only eats glot. I eat regular. Okay, so you say to me, Rabbi, let's go to the glot kosher restaurant because Toby only eats glot, right? Person who eats regular kosher can still eat glot kosher, right? A person who eats glot can't eat regular, right? So it's not an unreasonable thing to ask, right? Not an unreasonable thing to ask, okay? But I say, no, I insist that we go to the regular kosher restaurant, right? Seems a bit churlish, right? Seems a bit inconsiderate, right? So question, why is Rabbi Yosei being a jerk? Or is he being a jerk? Before we go on to the next paragraph.
You
Do you think
follow,
he's
you
what?
follow who has the higher standard. You
One
always
would
follow
think,
who has-
right? One would think, right? I mean,
Of course I would.
because you can always act more stringently, right? If you're satisfied with regular kosher, you can still eat glot kosher,
Right.
right? If you don't keep halav Yisrael, you can still drink halav Yisrael milk, right? Or eat halav Yisrael cheese, right? If you think Shabbos ends
Begins.
begins or ends. Well, the ends is really the more important thing. You think Shabbos ends 18 minutes after sundown, but you're doing something with somebody who says no, 36 minutes. right? You could wait 36 minutes, right? The person who holds by 36 can't wait for 18, right? You can, as you put, you can always follow a higher standard,
Standard, that's what I said.
right? That's exactly what you said. So, but Rabbi Yosei we're going to see, is going to be a jerk. Okay. So he, meaning Rabbi Yosei, says to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, each and every day you cherish my statements before those of Rabbi Yehuda and rule in accordance with my opinion. And now you cherish the statement of Rabbi Yehuda before me. Rabbi Yosei continued by applying a verse to this situation. Will he even force the queen before me in the house? This is from Esther. In other words, and the vocabulary here is a little bit cryptic, right? Which is one of the reasons why you have to learn Gemara with somebody who kind of already knows it. All right, so Rabbi Yossi is pissed off at this point because he says to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, oh, okay, so when we're discussing this in the Beit Midrash, you say I'm right. Okay, we're discussing it in the Beit Midrash. You say I'm right, but it's a theoretical discussion. Now it's no longer a theoretical discussion. It's tachlis, right? It's tachlis. We're actually have to decide what to do in this situation. And you want me to now, when all well and good when it's theoretical, you say, Rabbi Yosef is right, Rabbi Yehuda is wrong. Now it's not theoretical anymore, it's tachlis, and you want me to follow Rabbi Yehuda, right? Hagam lichboshet hamalka imi babayit, right? Which is what, right? Initially, what Ahasuerus said when he found Haman on the couch with Esther, right? In other words, what is he saying? Why is Yosef so upset? Why is Yosef so upset? I mean, I pretty much said it, right? In other words, when we're talking theory, you agree with me. But now that it's practiced, you don't want to agree with me anymore, right? Well, it matters when the rubber hits the road, right? And now the rubber's hitting the road, and you want me to act according to Rabbi Yehuda, right? Now, I would come back and say exactly what Stan said, but Yehuda's position is more strict. You can always act more strictly than you think is necessary. Always act more strictly than you think is necessary. You can't act less strictly than you think is necessary, right? So Rabbi Yosef's maybe not being a jerk. He actually has another concern. What might that concern be? All right, go on to the next section. Rabban Shimon said to him, if displaying concern for Rabbi Yehuda's opinion will be viewed as a halachic ruling, we will not interrupt, as perhaps the students will see that we have broken off our meal and will establish the halacha for generations in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. In other words, what's Rabbi Yosef's concern? In other words, apparently, right? So these three sages are having lunch together at their own table, right? And sitting elsewhere in the restaurant or the tavern or whatever are other students, and they're watching, right? The students are watching, but they're not privy to the conversation, right? And just like we had already this statement oh yeah, I was in this other rabbi's class and such a thing happened and he didn't object and therefore it must be valid, right? So Rabbi Yosei is worried, right? What is he worried about? What is Rabbi Yosei worried about when he references, well, maybe the students will see? Marcia.
Change their minds.
Yes, the unmute.
Well, whatever they do is going, well, is is going to be with accordance with one rabbi or the other. I'm sorry, I missed part of the discussion.
Right. All right. It seems that Rabbi Yosei is concerned, right? In other words, let's translate it into the theoretical that I gave about the two restaurants, right? And so Stan says to me, look, you could eat in a glatt kosher restaurant, even though you think glatt is unnecessary, right? Toby can't eat in a regular kosher because she only eats glatt. So we're going out with Toby. Let's go to the glatt restaurant. And if Stan says to me, do it just to be nice, okay, and I say, yeah, but you know what? Somebody will see us going into the glatt restaurant and they'll say, Rabbi Arian actually holds that glatt is messy, right? And because all they do is they see me walking into the glatt restaurant, they're not privy to all the discussion that went place beforehand, right? So now I'm concerned, right, that I don't know, the next time there's a ritual committee meeting and somebody's going to say, Rabbi Arian actually holds that you need glatt. Well, how do you know? Because I saw him go to the glatt restaurant, which he wouldn't go to if he didn't think you only need glatt, right? Because they're not privy to the discussion, right? So that's Rabbi Yosei's concern. It's not that he doesn't want to be nice. He's concerned that the students will see what they do, not know the reasoning, and then establish
Rika,
what?
go ahead.
Yeah, they'll establish a ruling that is actually an incorrect ruling. Right? In other words, if I could be certain that, in other words, if we could do this without setting a precedent, right? Because that's the concern. That's always the concern, right? I mean, it's the concern when you're in a position of leadership, right? That you do one thing in a particular situation, and then it's taken as a precedent. Right? I mean, you know, I remember a discussion that I had with you, Stan, at the beginning of the pandemic, when we made certain changes to our practices. And I said, it's not a precedent, it's just for the pandemic. Back when everybody thought the pandemic was a month, not for the rest of our lives. Right? And actually, Stan, you were right. It's now become a precedent. Right? The things that we did just for the pandemic, we're still doing. Again, nobody anticipated that the pandemic would last as long as it has or whatever, but right, you want to be concerned about not setting a precedent that's going to come back to bite you later. Right? And so that is Rabbi Yosei's concern. It's not that he's being a jerk. I mean, he may have been a jerk for all I know, right? But that's not what he's trying to do. And he probably wouldn't object to following Yehuda's more stringent opinion if he could guarantee that it would be understood as simply a courtesy and not a concession. Right? But since there were, and maybe if there had been no students around and it was just the three of them, he would have been fine with it, right? But because there were students around and they would cite this as a precedent, okay? So the sages later said they did not move from there until they established the halakha in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosef that one need not interrupt one's meal on the eve of Shabbat and festival. Okay. Now again, I find this whole thing, I mean, as a theoretical discussion, fine. But the fact that it actually happened, I find astonishing, right? I mean, you know, I mean, because frankly, like people drop me an email and they say, Rabbi, can I set a meeting with you for 3 o'clock on Friday afternoon or 3:30 on Friday afternoon? I say, no, you can't. I'm getting ready for Shabbos, right? So the fact that these people are eating lunch so late in the day that they're still eating lunch when Shabbos has already started, you know, I personally find astonishing, but apparently it happened. But maybe societal norms were different, or maybe they just didn't have, you know, I mean, they didn't have clocks and watches, so maybe that's it too. Okay.
But I have a question.
Yes, Toby.
If this was a matter of making an impression on the students, making
Right.
sure that they followed the rules correctly, why wouldn't the rabbis actually verbalize that with
Well,
them
they did.
at some point?
They did. The sages later said they did not move from there until they established the halakha in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosef.
No.
They did do that. I mean, it's a good question, but I mean, they anticipated your question.
So was the halakha then based on this incident?
Remains to be determined.
Okay.
No, it remains because I mean, the thing is that how do you know what the halakha is, right? I mean, you don't go to the Bible and you don't go to the Talmud, right? I mean, these are not works of practical halakha, right? If all you're looking for is tell me the bottom line, you have to go to a code, right? You have to go to the Shulchan Aruch or the Mishnah Brura or the Torah or something like that. You know, you can't, I mean, the Talmud, in other words, the halakha as we follow it today is not always in accordance with the Gemara. Okay, this is more, I mean, it gives you the intellectual underpinnings of the law and it shows you the development of the law and the thought process, but it doesn't necessarily give you the bottom line black letter law.
For the era that you're living in.
Right. Or but
That
even for the era of the Talmud. Right. I mean, sometimes I mean, you will get there are two different phrases in Talmud that indicate that this is an unresolved question. Okay, one is where it says Tana-ehu, which means essentially, like, remember at the beginning of the class that I was saying that, a Tana always outranks an Amara, right? But if you have a discussion of a question and at the end they conclude that this is a disagreement between Tanaim,
Mhm,
then it's unresolvable.
mhm.
Okay, it's unresolvable. I mean, it'd be as if the Supreme Court, split 4-4 with one abstention, right? It's an irresolvable question, right? Or the other is where they simply say teku. Teku means essentially the same thing. It's a tie, and it's an unresolved issue, right? Because the Talmud is really not. The Talmud is not a code, and it doesn't see itself as a code.
Mhm.
Okay, so you may be bothered by the fact that you've studied 10 pages and still don't know what the law is. The Talmud is not bothered by that. Okay, I mean, and that's why it's one of the reasons why the practice of writing codes first started. And Maimonides was the first one to do that, right? He said, nobody's going to sit down and learn the whole Talmud. They just want to know what the law is. So I'm going to tell them what the law is, right? And then other people say, that's what Maimonides says. I'm not so sure, right? But that is the practice of writing codes. I mean, ultimately, we are a non-hierarchical religion, right? I mean, we don't have a pope that can tell you what the law actually is, right? And therefore, I mean, one shul does it this way, and one shul does it that way, right? The Yemenites do this, but the Lithuanians do that, whatever. It's not, it's just the nature of the beast. Okay. Now, so let's go on. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. Now, Rav Yehuda and Rabbi Yehuda are not the same people. Okay. Rav is a Babylonian title. Rabbi is a Palestinian title. Okay. So, and Amar, right? Amar means that this is an Amora. So this is a later, right? These are later authorities. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, the halacha is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who said that one must interrupt one's meal by removing the table entirely, nor is it in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, who ruled that one need not interrupt one's meal at all. Okay, so a later generation is saying, you know what? Rabbi Yehuda is not right, and Rabbi Yossi's not right either, right? Now, what is this remove the table entirely? Okay, now who the heck does that, right? But you have to understand, I mean, again, there's a different social context here too, okay? If you see those old movies from the Roman Empire where they're having a banquet, right? And everybody's reclining on the floor and they have a low table in front of them, right? And they're, if they don't, unless they have slaves feeding them grapes, right? They're taking their meal off this low table. right? That's what it means. Okay? When it says, when Rabbi Yehuda says remove the table entirely, right? They're not talking about take away your dining room table, right? They're taking, right, take this low table away, right? And Rabbi Yehuda says you have to take it away entirely. Rabbi Yossi says you don't have to do anything. Rather, one must spread a cloth over one's table and recite Kiddush, after which he may continue his meal. The Gemara asks, is that so? But didn't Rav Tachlifa bar Avdimi say that Shmuel said just as one interrupts for Kiddush, so one interrupts for Havdalah? People eating a meal on Shabbat until after nightfall must interrupt their meal to recite Havdalah. The Gemara inquires, what is the meaning of the phrase one interrupts? Is it not referring to removing the table? The Gemara answers, no, it is referring to spreading a cloth, which is sufficient for Havdalah as well, right? In other words, again, this is a totally different context, right? But we have this situation, right, where we're eating Friday afternoon and it's become Shabbos, okay? Or we're eating Saturday afternoon and Shabbos is over, okay? That has happened to me, right? That, the first never, the second yes, right? What do you do? And the Gemara says, no, you don't have to take away the table entirely. Spread a cloth. Spread a cloth. On Friday afternoon, spread a cloth and say Kiddush. On Saturday afternoon, spread a cloth and say Havdalah. Okay, now, I'm gonna wrap up soon, but I wanna dive a little bit deeper. Who cares? Who cares, and what's the practical concern here? What's the practical concern here?
Well, if you're talking about Shabbat, then you might be doing things that aren't allowed on Shabbat if you're removing, I don't know, even the little.
No, I mean, because you can remove the table because presumably you're eating indoors,
Yeah.
right? So you're not, it's not a question of carrying. All right.
But it could be other activities of cooking.
No, you're not cooking. You're eating. These are men. They don't cook. They don't cook. Man, they don't cook.
Men
That's
don't.
not the issue. Not the issue. Okay, so let me rephrase. What do you do after you eat your meal?
Bench.
You bench. And so what's the concern? Let me
That you
rephrase it
did
again.
bench.
What?
That you did not bench if you
You
stopped.
can bench, but here's the problem. I started eating my meal. It's Friday before Shabbos. Now Shabbos has started. I continue eating my meal. Now I finished my meal and I have to bench. What is my practical concern?
Is it the prayer that you have to say?
Bingo! Right? There's a difference between the Birkat Hamazon for a weekday and for Shabbos. Right? You have Shir Hamalo if it's Shabbos.
Oh, yes.
Right? You have Harachaman Hu Yanchilenu Yom Shakulo Shabbatu Menucha L'Chaye Olami. right? The Birkat Hamazon for Shabbos is different than it is for a weekday, right? If I ate the meal on a weekday, but I'm benching on Shabbos, do I have the weekday benching or the Shabbos benching? Conversely, if I ate the meal on Shabbos, but I'm benching and it's now a weekday, right? Which benching do I use? That's a real concern. I don't know. So I'm better off not being in that situation.
Okay.
Right? How do I avoid that situation? I say Kiddush, now I know. I say Havdalah, now I know. Okay, again, to us, this may be a minor concern. But I mean, if you do a deep dive into the laws of brachot, right? I mean, I spoke 20 minutes a couple of weeks ago on the question of what bracha do you say over pizza, right? But if you do a deep dive, for example, right, there oceans of ink have been spilled over the question of what bracha do you say for a banana? Okay, because is it ha'etz or is it ha'adamah? Right? Because we call it a banana tree. We call it a banana tree, but it's not really a tree. Really a grass, actually. Okay, and I don't know if anybody here besides me ever worked in the bananas on a kibbutz, but I can tell you that you cut down a banana tree with a machete because it's made out of cellulose. So to me, it's obvious that it's ha'adamah, but maybe it's not because, well, we call it a banana tree, right? Just like every now and then people say, well, maybe you shouldn't have coffee on Pesach because it's coffee beans and beans are, right? So you will read halachic works that are very concerned about what bracha you say over banana. Is it ha'etz or ha'adamah? So what do these halachic works tell you to do?
Say both.
No, you can't say both. You can't possibly say both because it's a bracha levatala. It's taking God's name in vain.
Well, you try to avoid the situation.
And but I like bananas. So what am I going to do?
Yeah.
It's easy. Only eat a banana as part of a meal that includes bread.
Right.
Right? How does that solve it?
It doesn't.
Yes, it does. It doesn't answer the question, but it solves my problem.
Yeah.
Right? Because if I eat it as part of a meal that includes bread, I've said hamotzi.
Lechem min haaretz, yes.
And that covers everything.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, if you're eating, right, if you're sitting down for a meal, right? I mean, let's say, you're having Shabbos dinner and you're eating chicken and potatoes, right? Chicken is shehakol, potatoes are ha'adamah, right? But you don't say shehakol before you eat your chicken. You don't say ha'adamah before you eat your potatoes, because everything's covered by the hamotzi that you said over the bread.
Yeah.
Right? So it doesn't matter, right? So if I have bread and I say hamotzi, and then I eat chicken, I don't say another blessing. I eat a potato, I don't say another blessing. Now I have my banana for dessert. I don't say another blessing. I'm covered. Doesn't matter whether it's eitz or adamah. I don't need to say a blessing for it at all because it's already covered. Right? So this is the kind of thing that, the law is very, very concerned about saying the right blessing. Right? So the law is going to be very, very concerned about the situation where you ate the meal in one status, but you're benching in the other status. Right? I don't know what to do. So it's best to avoid that situation altogether.
Mhm.
And am I on?
Yeah.
And what if your meal does not include bread?
Then it's not a meal.
Right,
So
you don't have to bench.
You don't have to bench. You have to say, ala michya or berei nefashot rabot, but you don't have to say Birkat Hamazon. In fact, not only do you not have to say Birkat Hamazon, you should not say Birkat Hamazon, because that is only for a meal that includes bread. Right? There are other blessings that you say depending on whether you had mizonot or shehakol, but you don't say Birkat Hamazon. But in that situation, I mean, let's say you're eating chicken and potatoes, but you didn't have bread, right? So you would say shehakol for the chicken and adama for the potatoes, and don't have banana. Because you don't know. I mean, I would say yes, have a banana and say ha'adama, but a lot of legal works would say no, you can't have a banana because you don't know what blessing it is. All right, I know we didn't cover a lot, but this is spade work that to understand the methodology, and it's really it's all about the methodology. All right. Good night, everybody. Shabbat shalom.
Right.
Right.
Marcia,
Good
thank you
night.
for sending us Chicago weather this week.
Oh, God, it was freezing here.
Right. Well, Marcia, take it back.
It's gonna warm up, so you're gonna get some more.